Je suis Laurie Clota, vice-doyenne de bibliothèque de l'Université McGill. I'm delighted to welcome you here today as we hear about from author Jefferson Lewis about the second edition of Something Hidden, The Life of Wilder Penfield. We acknowledge that McGill University is situated on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked this territory where people of the world now gather. Something Hidden is the mesmerizing account of Wilder Penfield, a remarkable medical pioneer, the foremost figure of his time in Canadian neurology, and one of the world's leading neurologists. Thank you to Jefferson Lewis for joining us to help shed light on this giant of medical history, who also happened to be his grandfather. A journalist, documentary filmmaker, and writer, Jefferson Lewis is the author of more than 25 feature film screenplays in both French and English. It is sure to be a fascinating conversation with Dr. Rolando Del Maestro, honorary Osler librarian and professor emeritus at the Montreal Neurological Institute. And how fitting that this event is taking place here in the Osler Library of the History of Medicine, home to the Wilder Penfield Fond, a collection of materials including photographs, correspondence, manuscripts, research notes, and even academic gowns from his childhood up until his death in 1976. The Fond has been digitized and selections are available to view online, which I encourage each of you to explore. It is hoped that this digital selection of materials will be useful to researchers and will increase awareness of this valuable collection. And I want to thank Mary for welcoming us into the Osler Library this afternoon. And all the Osler Library staff, the Osler Board of Curators, McGill Multimedia, and to the library's events team for making fascinating events like this possible. So welcome again, and I'll hand it over to you if you're ready.
Thank you very much, Laurie. What's interesting about Jefferson is, here he decides to proceed with writing a book about his grandfather, and we'll talk about that a little bit. He then is involved in doing newspaper work and all the other work he's done. And then at the present time, he's developing an IMAX, a three-dimensional IMAX on the brain. So it's rather interesting that you start with, Sir William Osler, whose really goal was, or at least we'll talk about that a little bit today, maybe, trying to find the sort of place for consciousness, the place for the soul, the place for where we are inside the human brain. And here is Jefferson, 44 years later, working on the same sort of problem. And I think, again, it shows you the arc of history. The arc of history is sort of an interesting arc. It starts, continues through some time, and then at the end, sometimes it goes back to the beginning again. And we're going to do a little bit of that from that aspect of it. So to give you a little bit of information, my hope is that we'll have about 40 minutes of discussion and questions and some reasonable answers. And then I think we'll open it to the floor. If you have individuals who are online and would like to have a question, we can't do that directly, but if you have a friend who's in the audience, then you can send that particular note to the friend in the audience, and then that friend can ask the question for you from that point of view, so that will work. A couple of interesting things. One, I very much appreciate that Kate Williams is here, who is the oldest of the Osler grandchildren. Penfield grandchildren. Sorry, that was a long time ago. I'm also in my mind here. We're in the library here. The Penfield grandchildren, which I think there was about 15. Am I right there? Somewhere around that number. And Jefferson told me when they got together this year, there was about 90 or so of the family. So quite an impressive sort of heritage of genetics that have passed down through the ages from that point of view. The second thing I'd like to mention, where's Ruby in the group here? Ruby's here. Ruby is the great granddaughter. And remember how I was talking about arcs? This is quite an arc, eh? You're going from Penfield to Penfield's granddaughter, and then Ruby, who's a great, great, great granddaughter. So I think what we can do is start, and we'll start.
Hello. Oh, that gives me a much deeper voice than I normally have. Do I sound more authoritative?
So starting Jefferson, your grandfather dies. It's 1974. 76. You're about 25 years old at that particular time period. And then you decide to write a biography of your grandfather. Why? You're a relatively young man, and to take on such a sort of important role seems interesting. So can you explain what you were feeling at that time about actually writing this biography?
That's a very it's a very good question. I think if I'd had any idea of how much work it would involve, I would probably have desisted. But my feeling was that I looked around, there didn't seem to be many candidates to do a biography. And I felt that so much of his life had taken place outside of the Montreal Neurological Institute that it was important that whoever wrote about his life include all of that, and include also his family life, which was really for a man like him the basic building block of everything. And his family was, for instance, he would have never achieved a fraction of what he did achieve without a mother who was so devoted to him, unimaginably devoted to him. He wrote her every week. She typed up his letters. She put them in binders and sent them back to him, so he had a record of everything that he had said to her. And anyway, I felt I was also young enough and perhaps stupid enough as a young journalist to think this is something I can do, and it will not be won't take me forever. It ended up taking 5 years. Partly because after year one, my uncle said, "Oh, we have some boxes in the garage that you should probably take a look at." And so we went into the garage, and in these boxes were his diaries from the age of 12, I think, 11, right up until a few days before he died. So I looked at those and my heart sank. And I thought, well, I think I can add a few more years to the schedule. And they were an extraordinary source, and just what I was hoping for.
When in the opening of your book, you talk about a specific letter that you found that your grandfather had written to you, but had never sent. And that seemed to have some effect on your sort of feeling about your grandfather, and also the idea of writing the book. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, we, amazingly enough, he had 15 grandchildren, and I was not particularly special. But he was a Victorian who believed in engaging with everybody. He loved a good argument. He was very religious. He liked to go to church on Sunday, and he made when he wasn't, he would go from church to church, and I'm sure the ministers looked down from the pulpit with dread when they saw Dr. Penfield there, because he would, at the end, when the minister was shaking everyone's hand and saying, "Hope you enjoyed it," they would hear from him, and their lunch would be spoiled, no doubt, if he wasn't happy, or he would start asking questions, and they would end up in this conversation, and if he didn't feel you were giving good weight for your sermon, he would go to another church. So we had that kind of relationship as well. I'm a church-going person, but as a journalist, he would read everything that I wrote and let me know exactly what he thought of it. And we rarely agreed, but it was a good fight. He felt that the world was going to, this was the 1970s, so he didn't think the world was going in a very good direction, and society was not going in a very good direction, and he thought that I was a cynical, smart-ass reporter, and he's right. And so we duked it out on more than one occasion, and I can't remember what you asked me.
The question was about the letter that you found that
yes,
he
the
did
letter.
not write.
Well, the letter was one. It was one of those. He actually did send me a letter, responding. You know, it was one of those that began. It's 4 a.m. and I've gotten up from my bed because I couldn't sleep after reading your article, and now it's, you know, and then it would go on and on. And my letter, the letter that didn't get sent, was my letter to him in response to that, which I was going to really once and for all settle the score about everything we disagreed on, and then he died, which was very unfair, and it was one of the reasons I decided to write the biography, because it was not to settle the score, but to show what an amazing man he was, who in his 80s was still prepared to debate and felt passionately about so many things, wide-ranging things, way beyond his quite amazing medical achievements, but in his philosophies, in his belief in the importance of teaching children a second language, which led him into a huge battle which he just relished with the Quebec government, which was saying, "Oh, we can't confuse children by teaching them 2 languages at that young an age." And he was saying, absolutely, you've got to teach children 2 languages, if not 3 or 4 languages at that age, because once you create the pathways in the brain for language, those pathways can be used by all kinds of other forms of learning. And that was extremely unpopular and just the kind of battle that he enjoyed.
And, you know, if you look at the first edition, this is the first edition. All right. It's published in 1981. This is a new relaunch. Why the change?
Why did the change of the cover?
Yes.
Well, I never liked the first cover. I have an uncle, a very distinguished writer, wrote a biography of Edith Wharton that won a Pulitzer Prize, and the book that he wrote and the way it was published was beautiful. And I looked at it had an illustration on the cover of Edith Wharton, and I thought, I'll do the same thing. So I gave it to the publisher and said something like this. And what they came up with was something with very big ears, who looks like he's a bat. But there are people who like it. So, go figure. I just wanted to draw the distinction between the two. And my wife, André, who's an artist, did the artwork and put it together. And I much prefer it. And I say that even when she's not here. And I felt it was important to, there's a new introduction by Delia Gavris. Is Delia here? One of the people who encouraged me to do another edition, release. In 1981, Doubleday, who published it, put out 10,000 copies. And 2 months later, when I tried to get some more copies because people were asking me for them, there were none left. It completely sold out 10,000 copies. I said, well, are you going to print some more? And they said, no. And so for the next 44 years, I've had to scramble around secondhand bookstores and go online and try to find copies. I was once offered a copy for $185 because it had my signature in it. The book sold for $20. So that was another reason that there was a lot of people contacted me and said, how can we get a hold of a copy? And I said, if you figure out a way, let me know. So I thought it was time to think about doing another edition. And also there's this 90-odd young Penfield descendants who really have not much of an idea where they came from. And I thought at least now they will be able to find out.
You put the book together in sort of 3 sections. The first section being Penfield, to the time period of coming to Montreal. And then that time period in Montreal were associated with the Montreal neurological and his activities. And then the third section was really after that time.
Yeah.
Tell us about the first section of the book. I mean, it would appear that his mother in particular, as you mentioned, had a really quite an incredible sort of ability to influence him and to help him and to make sort of his direction of his life. And how do you think that happened?
He had a brother and a sister. For some reason, his mother decided that he was going to change the world. And she was going to make sure it happened. And to the extent that she actually started a school called the Galahad School. His motto was, my strength is as a strength of 10 because my heart is pure. And she wanted to make sure that he had the best education possible. And she was, up until, well, we'll get to Ruth. She was a great supporter of him. She wrote this, she kept all these letters. We have a copy of No Other Gods, which is a novel that she started writing and which he took on after she died. But he went off, he came out of nowhere. I mean, literally a small town in Wisconsin. He was an outsider when he got to Princeton. His father was an absent figure in his life. Worse than absent, he was a doctor too, a homeopathic doctor. And in fact, his grandfather was a homeopathic doctor as well. So, 2 sets of complete quacks. Personal feeling.
But if you think about it, he has this relatively dominant mother, and then an absent father. So what was the structure of that? His father isn't there. Does he look for a father? I mean, is there a father that he looks for? And then we can maybe come back a little bit to this issue of the Sussex in a way.
Well, in fact, he in one of his visits, if there was his parents were separated, in one of his visits to visit his father, he was waiting around the waiting room. He was a doctor, and his waiting room was full, and his father was very careless, I think, and callous with his patients, and that struck him as just wrong. He right away. So, and for a long time he thought I never would want to become a doctor because I would never. That's what doctors do. Then I'm not going to do that. During the First World War, he was on board a ship called the Sussex, which was bombed by the Germans, and it was an American ship, and they were not at war yet. And he was shipped back to Oxford, where he was studying with Sir William Osler, and Sir William Osler, whom you probably all know about, was an extraordinary teacher, and who wrote a handbook that was essential reading for every medical student at the time and for many decades afterwards. Osler took a liking to him and invited him to stay at his house while he recovered. So he hobbled around on his crutches while Osler did his rounds, and saw how Osler treated his patients, the manner in which he would speak to them. He always spoke quietly. He would lower his voice. He would touch them. He would engage with them. He would look them in the eye. He had a way of being with patients that was made the patients feel like human beings, and that was the father.
So you basically think that Osler became somewhat of a father figure to him, or what to aspire to relate to being a father?
I think absolutely. When I saw him, when I was a patient of his for small childhood things, I can remember that extraordinary feeling of having all this attention focused totally on you. And I think it made it possible for him to do those long epilepsy operations when they would find often the locus of the epilepsy, the cause of it, and they would excise it. And he would ask the patients, he would say, we don't need to continue, but if we can continue a bit longer, these are conscious patients, we're going to learn more about the disease and more about the brain. And you can only get away with a question like that, I think, if you have the ability to get patients to trust you and to trust that you're doing this for a good cause and that you're thinking of them. So they would agree, and they got to do much more of their mapping than they would probably otherwise have been able to do. And that goes back to Osler and what Osler taught him about treating patients.
As someone who has operated on substantial numbers of patients who are awake, clearly it's an ability of two people to be sort of as one in a way. You're both working for the same thing, and it certainly would appear that Penfield had that a knack also to be able to sort of deal with that individual, and you're working as a team here, and we're all going to work together. And I think that's a very special ability that Penfield obviously had from that point of view.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So he's in New York. He's sort of operating a bit on the brain, a bit on other things, depending. Cohen's working sort of with him as a pathologist. New York's thinking of developing a neurological institute, so there's a potential for that. And suddenly he decides to come to Montreal. Why?
I think he wanted to go someplace where he would be his own man, as he would have put it, where there wasn't a huge number of other neurosurgeons and neurologists cluttering up the field. Also because he was a complete Francophile. He during the First World War, before he got bombed, he and his wife had gone to work in a field hospital in France. And for the time they were there, they just fell in love with everything French. When we were children, he would call his wife Chou. And we thought, Chou. Odd thing to call your wife. It was short for mon chou, mon petit chou. So he thought Montreal French, fantastic. Plus it's outdoors. He came from Midwest United States. He went Wisconsin winters, ice boating, snow. I mean, he wasn't afraid of the idea of being a cold city. So he came to Montreal thinking, and they were practicing their French. They came to Montreal and discovered, of course, that it was two cities. One was French and one was English, and he could look out from his office and see Hôtel Dieu. And he said to everyone, well, what are they doing over there? No one knew. So he started arranging for regular meetings between the French doctors and the English doctors, and struggled with his terrible French, despite everything that he could do to improve it. And he just was, when the Rockefeller Foundation said, we'll give you the money to build your dream of an institute where neurology and neurosurgery happen side by side. You can pick any city in the world you want. It didn't take him long to say Montreal. It's Montreal. And so they did. And the rest is history.
If we go back, he's now in Montreal. He's developing his practice in Montreal. It's going very well. And then Ruth, his sister. Ruth has headaches for many years. She has seizures. And he doesn't seem to be able to at least pick up earlier that she has a significant sort of potential of having a brain tumor. And someone looks in her eyes and she has what is called papilledema, which means she's had pressure there for many, a long time. And then she has a tumor. And then he decides he's going to operate on his own sister.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons he didn't notice is, first of all, his sister was living in California. His mother had converted to Christian Science. And Christian Scientists, as you know, don't believe in surgery or much of medicine. And so it became, Ruth has headaches, but they come and go. And his mother certainly, whatever, she was taking her to Christian Science treatments. So it came as a real shock when he realized how far gone she was, and that that she was within days or perhaps weeks of going blind when she came to Montreal. And I think he felt completely torn. he was what they were learning, what they had learned about the brain, led them to think that you could do, and you would know this better than I do, large incisions of the removals of the brain without changing the person. That's how little they knew about the brain. So, and from the fact that her eyes were showing bloodshot, clearly they were. He knew it was a frontal lobe that was going to have to be where the source of this tumor was, and that's what happened. Once they got her in the operating room, and Bill Cohn, who was his best friend and constant companion, and a very, very skilled surgeon as well. They opened up her skull, and they saw the size of the tumor, and my grandfather just went in there. He knew how much she had to live for, and what it would cost. She was the key to her whole family. But what could he do? So he went probably further. He definitely went further in the removal than he later thought was wise. And despite Bill Cohn's advice, telling him, no, stop there. But he was in a kind of a frenzy, I think, to try to save her.
So he's in this state. He's obviously dealing with a very vascular tumor. It's bleeding a lot. The bleeding becomes uncontrollable, basically. It's clear that she's going to die right there under his own hands. And Cohen takes over and saves her life.
Yeah.
What does he think of that?
Well, I think they were so close, those two, that he would have done the same for Cohen. So it was simply a part of their two of us in harness together approach, and he trusted Bill Cohn's instinct. And in fact, she amazingly did recover, and was well enough to go home. And for a while, she seemed to be better. And then slowly the tumor started growing back, and her memory was. She realized she couldn't organize things. He went to visit her and came. She was going to cook dinner, and he came into the kitchen, and everything was all over the table. Nothing had been done. The chicken was uncooked. Nothing. So he, jumped in and helped pull together the dinner. But he realized that someone who'd been incredibly organized before had lost the ability to organize, to multitask, to see. I got to turn the oven on, and I'm going to have to go do the chicken, and then I'm going to. I think that's probably where he realized just how much the operation had cost her.
Obviously, Cohen and as you say, they're in harness. They're in harness over this whole time period. Cohen's doing multiple different things, doing all the pediatrics, for example, doing most of the trauma and most of the other things. And then there comes a time period when your grandfather decides he's going to retire. There's a committee put together. There's certain names of the people that are going to be on that particular potential to be director of the Montreal Neurological, and Cohen's name is not there. Why do you think that happened?
I think first of all, since we know the consequences, I think he completely misjudged how Bill Cohn would respond. I think his intention was that he by that time he knew what an awful job it was being the director of an institute, and that how little science you got to do. You were doing fundraising, you were doing publicity, you were hiring and you were firing, and you were dealing with salaries and visiting fellows, and it was an endless series of jobs that Bill Cohn absolutely refused to do. I was absolutely uninterested and unsuited to do. He wouldn't even write up his own papers. He didn't want to. His focus was entirely on his patients and on his staff. And so I think in his mind, it was, Bill will be mad for a bit, but basically I'm doing him a favor because I'm sparing him this whole world that'll take him away from where he wants to be, which is in the hospital. With his patients. Completely wrong. Completely badly handled. But probably the most painful thing for Bill Cohn was that everyone agreed. The selection committee, the other doctor said, "Oh yeah, no, don't dump that on Bill. I mean, he'll go crazy if he has to sit in that office and write begging letters to millionaires for money to build a new wing. I mean, that's not something he's ever going to want to do." But it was a terrible misjudgment. He wrote about it. He wrote about it at great length and left the book that he wrote it in a notebook on a train to New York. So he spent the whole, 5 hours, 6 hours writing about Bill and his feelings about him, why he should have done that and what he should have done, and it disappeared. So we'll never know what that was. But I know that it broke his heart. The loss of Bill Cohn, and made him even more determined to move on. He always had dreams of doing other things. That's the something hidden in the title. He wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be a philosopher. He wanted to travel. He wanted to change the world. He wanted to sail and play with his grandchildren and get beaten at tennis and sulk about that. He had a whole life ahead of him that he felt he had done everything he could with the Neuro and as director, and not that he was giving up his scientific writing or his scientific work, but he was done with that whole administrative world.
So Cohen decides to take his own life, and you're the first person to really put that in print. You know that, for example, that he decides to take his own life in the hospital. He puts a number of pillows down in his own office, and he takes cyanide. Clearly, there's something that he's saying there. What do you think he's saying?
I don't think he was. I think he suffered from. Well, everybody thinks he suffered from manic depression and had periods when he was simply not thinking clearly. As to being the first to write about it publicly, in the 1970s, everybody knew. In fact, probably within days of Bill Cohn's suicide, everybody knew. The hospital is a small world, and he had called a nurse to say, don't forget to change someone's dressing, like an hour or two before. It was known. When I first started. I've always known that Bill Cohn, and partly because it was a subject that you can never address. It was not discussed. In those days, you didn't announce that someone committed suicide. This was inconceivable. They used euphemisms like died suddenly, or they might say heart attack, or they might say anything to avoid saying the word suicide, which, of course, where would you get buried in those days? I think it was definitely pointed at his partner. You left me, and now, you're going to walk away. I'm going to die in harness, but you're going to walk away. So I think suicides are a very aggressive thing, even if they're unintentionally aggressive. And I think he was sending a message, and I think the message was clear.
25 years after the Institute is put together, there's a sort of a celebration. Individuals come, for example, Greg comes and basically comments from the Rockefeller Institute and says that the money that had been given by the Rockefeller Institute to the Neural was the most sort of successful thing they'd ever done. At that particular time period, during that time, the publisher provides Penfield with a book of his book that related to epilepsy and the functional anatomy of the human brain, a special just for him. Shortly after that, it's known that Penfield's book, that was really after his mother, is published almost the same time. So here you have this incredible situation where he's at really one of the pinnacles of his career, getting every possible sort of type of prize he can get, including being invited to the coronation of the Queen Elizabeth II. He then is also writing books that are related to historical figures. How do you deal with this dichotomy?
Well, I think he found those were a lot more fun. Yeah, I think he'd been dreaming of writing fiction. I'm told that it's an occupational hazard with neurosurgeons, so Rolando, we have to wait and see what your first novel is going to be about. He loved imagine going to Mesopotamia, as it was, Iraq, Iran, all in search of. He just loved the research, and he and his wife went together, and they went there. And then when he wrote his second novel, The Torch, they did the same thing. The Torch was actually quite successful, and No Other Gods, I don't think, sold a lot of copies, but The Torch was optioned for a movie and sold quite well. And in fact, we remember when I was in our teens, we were amused to see the royalty statements that the publisher in the Soviet Union would send, and they had done 15 or 20 different language translations of The Torch. And so all these rubles were accumulating in a file. I remember my mother saying, it would be nice to go to Russia and get some of those rubles. Never did, and then they're probably long gone. But I think the second career his second career, he did about 4 other careers after that, including the Vanier Institute for the Family and leading to his very interesting Mystery of the Mind, where he decided to go back and look at 2,000 operations and see if he could figure out where in the brain the spirit entered. That there was a physical place somewhere in the brain. And people have been speculating about that for thousands of years. In fact, I thought it was in different parts of the human body. It took a while to figure out it was probably in the brain, if it was. And he had a writing house, a writing cabin. It was an old milk shed, which he'd had dragged out to the top of a hill looking down over the lake, Lake Minfamagog. And there was a big rock that had been displaced. And before he began the book, he went down there with some cans of house paint. He was not gifted artistically, and painted his whole premise. The Greek word for knowledge, a picture of the brain, a question mark, arrows going back and forth, and the medicine will figure this out. I'll figure this out. And he sat there in his milk shed and worked away diligently. And when he got to the end of the book, he realized that it was not provable, that there was nothing, if there was a place, he hadn't found it. And that everyone, if you felt that God spoke to you, then you had to take that on faith. It wasn't something that science could bolster and provide you with an answer to. And so he wrote that at the end of the book, and he went down on his rickety legs. He was in 85, 84, 85, and with a can of paint, black paint, and drew big slashing lines. Basically, saying it was beyond the reach of science to answer those questions. Certainly beyond his reach. And but I thought that was admirable.
To finish this off, he knows he's going to die. He's had an exploratory operation. He's got a gastric carcinoma that is clearly unremovable. He decides not to have radiation therapy. He's on the last part of his life. He writes a letter to be opened when he dies. But he decides not to die at home with his wife, who is loved every day. He goes to the neuro, and about 3 days or so later, he dies. In one way, it's sort of interesting that those two episodes are sort of linked. You know, the idea that maybe you can't find, where the soul is and where the mind really is with the knowledge we have today, although one can argue with artificial intelligence, maybe we're getting a bit closer. But so there's that part. And then this very sort of touching part about the letter. His wife keeps the letter until she dies. Part of her, linkages with him. So it's interesting that you have these two things happening at the end, this love with his family. And I thought maybe just you could just tell us a little bit about what a Sunday was like near there, that time period when all the family was together and a Sunday morning, and what was that day like? Because I think that'll give the audience a little bit about what the man is about and what he thought about his family and the love for his family. So maybe just to finish, you can talk about that.
Yeah, there were no churches nearby, and the roads were terrible. So quite early on, they decided to have that the children would, and then eventually the grandchildren as well, and the great grandchildren, some of them would. He would read, either read from the Bible or quite often talk about his travels and what he had concluded and what he was writing about. And it didn't go on for very long, and then we would have donuts and hot chocolate, and that was the highlight. And then we would be released to go and sail or swim or play tennis, so it's pretty. So I would say we were very fortunate. He would speak to us as if he was talking to adults about what he was thinking about, which I'm not sure we always deserved, but it made us feel we were part of his life and that we were important to him. And it's a tradition that we've kept up because we can't stop. We're having too much fun.
A poet by the last name was Valerie, when talking about and writing about Leonardo, said that what a person leaves after him are the dreams that his name inspires and the works that make him a symbol of admiration. So thinking about Penfield, clearly, I think the dream that people still have is sort of the idea that somehow we can decipher what the brain is about, what humanity is about, what this 3-pound thing inside of our head. Anybody who has seen the brain, it's an amazing, amazing thing to see a human brain. It pulsates every time the heart beats. It has an interesting color. You can operate on it when the patient's awake. It has no pain fibers. The sort of object in the universe that understands pain, feels pain, allows us to feel pain, feels no pain. And so I think that search is still there. And the second thing I think that's interesting about Penfield is that, he put neurology, neurosurgery, neuropsychology, neuropathology, all the neural sort of concepts together in one building. And that was so novel at the time, and is still so novel today, that I think maybe that is still the second part. The dreams, we can maybe get closer to what humanity is in the human brain. But that's going to have to occur from a group of people all working together to find the answer. And maybe that is really the end. That there is the search. He put together at least a map for finding it, and the search goes on. The search goes on.
Beautifully said, Bill Hanlon. Thank you. Thank you.
Is this one on?
I'm very sorry we took longer than 40 minutes, but I couldn't stop them.
I do think it's perfect, and I do want to thank everyone. I'm Mary Earle. I'm the head of the Osler Library here. It's always inspiring to see the work that comes out from behind the locked doors where we protect the material. And of course, the Penfield Archive it's not just our greatest in terms of the number of, I just showed you the rows and rows and rows that all these archival boxes take up, but it's definitely our most used collection. People are coming in all the time, and just, it feels to me like, it's always, as far as I've been here, it's been very popular, but just the interest in it is really, really ramping up. I do want to acknowledge, of course, that with the STM strike, some people might need to go out, and so we have ended, and I thank everyone for being conscientious of the time. We do, of course, have some things, and we do hope people will continue the discussions, but really thank you so much for being here. Obviously, thanks again to all the staff, but thanks so much also to the Penfield family, and we really feel very privileged to have that material here, and we know that people from around the world are coming, yes, because of Osler, but also because of Penfield. So thank you very much.
Perfect. I'm absolutely sure that Jefferson will answer any question everybody has for him. So if you have questions for
Answer standing up.
I have a question. First of all, it's a great privilege for me to meet you. I've lived with your book, the original copy, which I bought in London, Ontario, when I was doing an elective there with Dr. Drake, and I came back, and this hasn't been mentioned, I came back to Montreal from London, Ontario in a terrible snowstorm to be present at a motion picture based on your book. And I'm sure you were aware of that. Dr. Feindel put on a great show. And he even commissioned the dean of the school, the Schuldeis School of Music, to write an introduction. There's a word for that. I forget what it is. Not a score, but like. Well, okay. Anyway, a piece of music that someone would use to open a gala or a major event. And so I going back to Dr. Del Maestro was saying, first it's written, then it was video presented or on film, and now you're doing something in three-dimensional space. So that's great to know. I was also, like you, intrigued about his sister's case, Ruth. I forget her married name. A few months ago, we entertained at the Neuro the American Association of Neuropsychiatrists, psychiatrists who approach diseases of the mind with a neurological, physical approach. And one of the attendees asked me a question that I couldn't answer, and I'm going to put it to you. You write in the original volume that Penfield's sister, and I presume that's Ruth, had epilepsy or some sort of spasm as a child, that the mother would hide away, and that Penfield was aware that something was going on. And the thesis that this person wanted to explore was that the fact that his sister was epileptic is probably what drew him to epilepsy when he started at Columbia University. So I wonder if you have any further thoughts on that.
That's fascinating. I don't think that they were related in the sense that I'm not sure at the time when Ruth was having, it was, people kept a cloak over these things in those days. So how much did you know what was being hidden? Was it just, would it, it could be some female problem. It could be anything. I don't think he made the connection between those fits, which may or may not have been epileptic, but certainly were troubling and had a great physical reaction, when he started operating for epilepsy. I think when he started operating for epilepsy in New York, it was often people who were been, in terrible condition. They'd been knocked over by a streetcar, or they'd had a buzzsaw gone through their head, or it was, so they were going into the brain to do whatever they could, and seeing the symptoms of epilepsy develop certainly started to become a sign of something going wrong in the brain.
Yeah, I think too, especially after this First World War and all the injuries, the epilepsy there, and the whole business of that, I think that sort of occurred a little bit before his sister. And so I'm sure his sister did not decrease his interest in epilepsy, that's for sure. Having that particular disorder certainly helped from that aspect of it.
Yeah.
This not my hypothesis. This was a hypothesis of the neuropsychiatrist. And I think as a neuropsychiatrist, he was looking to some psychological motivation that would have driven him for the rest of his life. And then, seeing if indeed that was his sister, 12, 13 years old, having these episodes of spasm. That was her thesis, that was the psychological drive.
Right.
Personally, I don't believe that at all, as I think Rolly does. Just one point about her sister, if I can. Delia is here. She asked me one time what I thought Dr. Penfield's greatest contribution was, and I said his discovery of the oligodendrocyte. The oligodendrocyte is one of the 4 cells of the brain, and the 4th one, the last one to be discovered, the oligo, we refer to it, was discovered by Penfield when he was in Madrid with Del Rio Ortega and Cajal. His sister, Ruth, had an oligodendroglioma. So the cell that he discovered was ultimately the cause of his sister's death. So it's sort of an interesting synchronicity there.
Yeah.
As I talked about, a little bit of arcs here, continuous arcs from one end to the other. I think maybe that's, I think maybe we can shut it down there. There's 2 things. If people were interested in his book, I'm sure that Jefferson would be interested in signing them for them. And there is some food here too for everybody from that point of view. So thanks everybody for coming. And special thanks to Jefferson for all his insights. And Jefferson and I had a little bit, about 2 or 3 days ago, we were talking about various questions that we would describe. Some of them we got through, some of them we didn't. But I think you certainly got the impression that Jefferson lived his life in a very rich environment, and Penfield was part of that rich environment, and it continues now. So thank you very much.